Speaking of liberty, the National Broadcasting Company takes pleasure in presenting another in this second series of programs under the auspices of the Council for Democracy. Once again, we have a period of free talk on the air, and once again, our host is Rex Stout, who most of you already know as the author of baffling mystery stories featuring the amazing performances of that master criminologist, Nero Wolfe. On these programs, you will get to know Rex Stout even better as an outspoken champion of our American democracy. Mr. Stout.
Thank you, George Putnam. Good evening, friends of liberty. Here at the microphone with me is visible, startling evidence of the shrinkage of the globe we live on. It's a man who in recent months, not years, months, has visited London, Cape Town, Cairo, Alexandria, the Sahara, with a special side trip to Hellfire Pass, Rangoon, Bangkok, Singapore, Manila. He sounds more like an atlas than a man. As foreign correspondent for Collier's magazine, he has covered nearly every battlefront of the war. He's interviewed Ciano, Mussolini, General Wavell, General Auchinleck. He's written a book, soon to be published, called War Has Seven Faces. His name is Frank Gervasi.
Thank you, Mr. Stout. I was beginning to feel extremely anonymous.
I was saving the best till the last, Mr. Gervasi. The word for you is ubiquitous, not anonymous. But in our brief 15 minutes, I'm afraid we'll have to localize. Well, how about the Middle East? What are the German and Italian objectives there?
Well, of course, the most obvious objective is oil. The Germans want the oil fields of Iraq and Arabia for two reasons. They need it themselves, and they want to take it away from the British. Without the oil of the Near East, the British would be really crippled.
Well, couldn't they get all the oil they want from America and the Dutch East Indies?
They could eventually, but it would take time and tankers, and there aren't enough tankers even now. Oil is one of the German objectives, Mr. Stout, and there are two others. They want the Nile Valley, which means big stores of cotton, wheat, and grain, and they want to open routes for the coming Battle of Asia. That's one of the biggest objectives of all.
And you think the war is headed east instead of west?
It certainly seems so. Mein Kampf is still Hitler's Bible. It explains, among other things, why he attacked Russia. He wanted the Russian resources, of course, but even more than that, he wanted to be able to use Russia as a great forward base for the advance on Asia.
Well, what about the attack on Britain? You don't really believe he's crossed that off his list?
Nobody can say for sure, but I'll risk a guess. I believe that Hitler would like to see the island of Britain permanently under siege and slowly starving to death. Part of that is pure revenge, of course. Hitler has never forgotten or forgiven the British blockade of Germany during the last war. And if he can, he'll do the same thing to the British now.
Yeah, if he can. But getting back to the Middle East, Mr. Gervasi, what do the British plan to do there? Just hold the fort?
You might say the British plan is the German plan turned backwards, Mr. Stout. That is, they intend at all costs to keep the Nazis away from their oil supply, and then, if possible, to drive the Germans and Italians out of North Africa. If they succeed in doing that, they can use Libya as an advance base for a smashing attack on Italy.
Success or failure, depending on the climate, the timing, what forces they can muster, what supplies they can get, what supplies they can get from America. The forces, that is, the manpower, are about equal. And after all, the climate is no worse than Texas. I've been in Texas, too. American supplies and American ships are really the key to the military situation in the Middle East, Mr. Stout. You see, the greater part of the British output is kept at home in Britain, and why not? The British know very well that the war won't be lost in the Middle East at a single stroke. But the war can be lost, and lost suddenly and finally in Britain. A single bad blunder, sending away too many tanks and planes, for instance, could open the way for a quick German assault. That's why they're playing it very, very safe. Those American supplies you speak of, what about the rumors of their poor quality, faulty design?
Don't you believe it, Mr. Stout. Not for a minute. I can assure you absolutely that our American tanks and planes are the best in the world. I know that sounds like a Yankee Doodle, but it's true. They're trickling into Egypt and the Middle East right now, and just as soon as there are more of them, and the British learn how to use them, well, that may be the hour for the big push to drive the Nazis out of North Africa. All the British need is time and trained men and American supplies.
What about that part of the Middle East where there are no American supplies and may never be any? What about Turkey?
Turkey, that is another question. And it's particularly interesting because it's tied up with the question of the whole Muslim world. I sometimes wonder if people over here realize how large that world is. Do you?
Well, Turkey, of course, Egypt, Arabia, North Africa.
It's a much wider world than that, Mr. Stout. Say 2/3 of the whole continent of Africa,
Arabia, Persia, Turkey, Afghanistan, part of India, north into European Russia, east into Turkestan, and right on to the edge of China. It's a world of primitive ideas and deep spiritual feeling. It's full of different races and tribes, all bound together by the faith of Muhammad. It's unstable, unpredictable, and watchful. I believe it was Lawrence who said that Arabs could be swung on an idea as on a cord, and it's still true.
Are they on a cord now? Who's swinging it?
The whole Arab world, or the Muslim world, is motivated by the ideas of freedom and independence. That's one of the good things the British have done there. After the last war, the war that smashed the Turkish Empire, the British set up little countries and kingdoms like Iraq and Iran and Saudi Arabia and Transjordania. So the leaven of those ideas is still moving all through the Middle East. They understand the issues at stake between fascism and democracy. But the Muslim world respects power and prestige, which derives from power. And so, as I say, it's watching to see who applies the most power at the point where the leading nation of the Muslim world meets the West.
Which is Turkey.
Right. Turkey is by all odds the most vital of all the Muslim countries. The Turk has a conception of nation and state that the Arab doesn't have. Politically, he's much more mature. But right now, Turkey is very much divided. More than anything, she wants to stay neutral.
Well, suppose she can't, Mr. Gervasi. What then? What if Germany demands free passage to attack Russia from the south?
As I say, Mr. Stout, Turkey is divided. On the surface, she is faithful to her alliance with Great Britain. But below the surface, many little signs point to a sympathy with the Axis.
What signs? Can you specify?
Very easily. The broadcasts of Radio Ankara for Western consumption are anti-Axis. But their Arabic broadcasts for home consumption follow the Berlin party line. A British newspaperman has a devil of a job getting a phone call through from Ankara to Istanbul. A representative of the DNB, the Nazi press agency, gets his right away. British ships going through the Bosphorus are held up for several days with cargo checking. British ships are checked through in half an hour. Shall I go on?
You made your point, Mr. Gervasi. And you think that when the pinch comes, Turkey will go pro-Nazi?
I don't know, because there is a counterpoint. It may be absolutely nothing but legend and superstition, but there are many people in Turkey, mostly the common people, like the peasants and the private soldiers of the army, who cling to the will of Kemal Ataturk.
His will? Do you mean his policy?
No. The story is that when Turkey's strongman, Kemal Ataturk, lay dying in 1938, he wrote a codicil to his will, sort of a political testament to his country. He wrote, "For as long as you can honorably do so, keep Turkey out of war. But if you must go to war, don't fight on Germany's side. With Germany, you lose if you win."
That's certainly putting it straight. Is it just a story, or did Ataturk really write that?
No one knows. The common people believe it implicitly. I heard it first before Germany started into the Balkans. I heard it later in Damascus from a Turkish officer. And I heard it again in Cairo from a high-born Turkish woman who had just come from Ankara.
Well, you say the common people believe it, Mr. Gervasi. Does that mean that the politicians and the Turkish ruling classes do not?
They're apt to shrug it off. You see, Mr. Stout, the story in Turkey is very much what it was in Greece and Yugoslavia. Many of the politicians in the upper classes, even the middle class, were appeasers. They thought that if they played the game with Hitler and angled for time, they could keep out of trouble and keep all the pleasant, comfortable things they were accustomed to. You know what happened in Yugoslavia, how the army and the people threw out the government at the last minute and insisted on fighting. But it isn't quite so well known that the situation was almost the same in Greece. Right up to the moment of the Italian invasion, certain Greek statesmen were playing the Axis game. If Italy hadn't forced the war and roused the common people, they might be playing it yet.
Well, you think that after all, when the time of decision comes, Kemal Ataturk's will may bring Turkey in on the side of the democracies.
It's an even bet, Mr. Stout. The upper classes in Turkey are appeasers, want to try to do business with Hitler. Hitler's ambassador, Franz von Papen, has promised the Turks very large rewards after the war, if they do the right thing. According to von Papen, Hitler will give the Turks Armenia and the Russian province of Azerbaijan. The Turks would love to get Azerbaijan from Russia. 75% of the population is Turkish anyway, and the country is rich in naphtha, manganese, and oil, to say nothing of cotton and caviar. So some of the politicians favor the Axis. But the common people, the peasants, and the soldiers of the army, including the officers, know that they will lose their freedom if Germany wins, and they are willing to fight to defend their homes. Also, they remember the will of Kemal Ataturk.
Well, can they pull it off? Will they be able to grab the decision from the appeasers? Possibly, Mr. Stout, they couldn't in Romania and Bulgaria. They did in Greece and Yugoslavia. With help in time, they may in Turkey. And that brings me to something that I want very much to say, and say as strongly as I can. All through the Middle East and Europe, the common people are willing to die for freedom. They are willing to die if necessary. They are more than willing to fight, and they must have help. Courage these days isn't enough. As Colonel Lawrence said, the Muslim world can be swung on an idea, and it respects power. It has the ideas of freedom and independence. It's waiting for practical help in the form of tanks and planes and guns, particularly in Turkey. If the common people at the moment of decision see powerful British forces to the south, ready and able to bring them aid, they will fight against the Nazis.
I hope they do. One more thing, Mr. Gervasi. Do the people of the Muslim world really have a feeling for democracy, for what we mean by democracy?
No, not as we know it, Mr. Stout. The Muslim world is politically immature. Except for Egypt and Turkey, where the spirit of nationalism is very strong, our notion of democracy is respected, but not completely understood.
If it isn't understood, why is it respected?
Because America has a tremendous influence and prestige all through the Middle East. It's partly due, I believe, to the work of American missionaries and doctors, and partly to the graduates of such famous American schools as Robert College in Istanbul and the American College in Beirut.
But aren't the graduates of both those schools Christian?
Mostly, and I know what you're getting at. How can Christians have much influence in Muslim communities? All I can tell you is that they do. They've learned American skills, for one thing, which gives them prestige, and they spread the story of American power and greatness. Even more important, they've learned that in one of the greatest countries of the world, millions of men of goodwill enjoy a way of life and an individual freedom of which the Muslim has only dreamed. So even if our own brand of democracy isn't fully understood in the Middle East, it's respected. The Muslim world is a world of restlessness and primitive moods and religious fervor. Now, wherever there is a dawning political consciousness, it looks towards the United States, because we here in America have the only vital thing left to give the world. The spirit of freedom is strong in the Middle East, and, underneath the surface, is still as vital as ever in the captive nations of the Mediterranean. Democracy and republican forms of government were born in the Mediterranean lands, and the common people have never forgotten. Even in Italy, they have not forgotten. Everywhere the common people look to America. Spiritual fervor can build a new world, and only America can supply both the spirit and the form. The binding cement may very well be a world ideal of individual freedom in a framework of democracy.
May be and must be. Thank you, Mr. Gervasi. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest today has been Frank Gervasi, foreign correspondent and author of the book soon to be published entitled War Has Seven Faces. I hope you read it. This is Rex Stout saying goodbye until next week.
You have just heard the sixth of another series of programs entitled Speaking of Liberty, brought to you each week by the National Broadcasting Company in cooperation with the Council for Democracy, a national organization dedicated to the propagation of an American faith in democracy. Next week, Rex Stout will bring Commander Edward Ellsberg to the microphone. A copy of this afternoon's script will be mailed free of charge to anyone requesting it. Please address your letter or your card to the Council for Democracy, 285 Madison Avenue, New York City. The Council for Democracy, 285 Madison Avenue, New York City. Speaking of Liberty has been presented as a public service by NBC and the independent radio stations associated with the Red Network of the National Broadcasting Company. This afternoon's program has reached you from the RCA Building, Radio City in New York.